Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Deneen. Welcome to the Becoming Anchored podcast. I am your host for today's episode. Lauren Jackson is not with us today, but she is with us in spirit. I'm so excited for today's content and really just thrilled to introduce you all to our lovely guest, Anna Creer. But before we get started, just a quick disclaimer. This is not meant to be your therapy. If you find this helpful to you and supplemental to the work that you are doing in therapy, I'm so glad. And if you would like to reach out to us, if you're local to the state of Tennessee, we would love to work with you. And if not, please find someone local to you. The Becoming Anchored podcast was really Lauren's idea, actually. And we started this podcast for a couple different reasons. Number one, we were both wanting to do something a little bit different than one-on-one client care. And while we love one-on-one client care, this has just been such a fun creative outlet for us. So we share about our humanity on this podcast. We talk about being working moms. We talk about the ebbs and flow of friendship. We talk about just some of our own mental health concerns and how we've navigated those over the years. So we really are open and transparent on this podcast. And we also talk about the gifts and the wisdom of sitting with clients. So Lauren and I both just cherish this work and we love what we do. And so we're here to share some of the hopefully wisdom that we've learned over the years as clinicians. We love our clients. We love this work. We just find it so fulfilling. And so if you're new to this podcast, that's what we're all about. So without further ado, welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So Anna and I have known each other for, I don't even know how long now, but almost a decade, probably.
7 or 8 years.
Yeah. We've collaborated on many different cases. So Anna is an amazing dietitian in the Nashville area. And I just am so excited to have you on the show today.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we thought we would talk about how to let go of the eating disorder identity. We actually got this request on our stories I posted a while back, like, hey, everyone, what are you interested in hearing us talk about on the show? And so this was actually a specific request. And I think it's really applicable to a lot of different folks in eating disorder recovery. And my hope is even if you don't have an eating disorder, that you can take some of the concepts that we talk about today and apply it in different areas of your life. But yeah, it's a big topic, how to let go of your eating disorder identity. I know that you work quite frequently with folks in your practice with disordered eating or eating disorders. And so I know that you're an excellent person to talk about this topic with.
Yeah. And I think this can really go in two different directions. So I'll kind of give maybe a few thoughts in both directions. And then maybe we'll see what therapist you have to say.
Oh my gosh, please go for it.
So, one thing that I will acknowledge is that there are a lot of people who really identify with their eating disorder of like, this feels like it is a part of me. And I always feel like you wouldn't be using your eating disorder if it wasn't useful to you in some way. And so I think that there can be a real grief. And I think there are a lot of clients who need to really grieve that loss of identity. I'll hear clients in my office say things like, I don't know who I am without my eating disorder, or my eating disorder made me this very particular kind of brand of a person. What will I be like without it? And I think that can be a really joyful thing to explore, but also there's a lot of grief there. But on the other side, I think I get a lot of clients in my office that will say things like, I'm seeing these things about recovery and I know recovery could be great, but like, I don't want to recover for recovery itself. And they kind of need something bigger than just being a person who's in recovery or kind of having this new identity as not having eating disorder or being in recovery. And I think for a lot of those clients, I'm like, yeah, what if our entire goal is to not be a person who the biggest, most important, most interesting thing of your life is that you've had an eating disorder? What if the most interesting thing is that you can show up in the way that you want to in your life, whether it's as a sister or as a friend or as a really excellent employee or as a mother, as, someone who's really good at a certain hobby. Like, I think there's so many areas. And then, okay, if I now want to be awesome at my job, or I want to find this new creative outlet, or I want to do these things, okay, how then could recovery help support you to do those things. And it kind of gives a bigger reason than just like, don't you want to be recovered? Because eating disorders are crappy. And they are. They're terrible. I wish no one had eating disorders. But I also think for a lot of clients, especially that have been dealing with an eating disorder for many, many, many years, sometimes that allure of recovery that they were maybe initially sold doesn't always feel like it's enough to get them there.
Yeah, I absolutely concur with everything you've shared. And yeah, I agree with you. It can't just be like, I want to recover for the sake of saying I'm recovered.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be something or some things, multiple things or items, if you will, that are in line with a client's value system. And it has to be bigger than just recovery itself, right? It has to be tied to something that matters to that person, whether it's, I want to recover because I want to be able to have a baby down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps having an eating disorder puts that at risk. Or I want to be in a relationship where I can go out to eat with my partner or spouse and experience freedom around that versus constant worrying about my food choices. So yeah, I agree with you. It has to be bigger than just recovery for the sake of recovery for most clients.
Right. And I think for a lot of clients too, if someone's asking something like, well, how do I get rid of this eating disorder? I think to me, that's kind of a lie of the eating disorder, that is all that there is to you. Like to me, an eating disorder is just one part of someone, even if it does feel like is taking up so much air in the room that it feels like that's all there is to them. That I think for those type of clients, I would really encourage them to say like, okay, what else do I enjoy? What else, even if maybe you don't think about other things a lot in your day, maybe you want to be thinking about other things. Maybe you want to be thinking about those things. And I think for me, I always have found so much enjoyment with clients getting to see them then experience the world in basically this like, what if you got to go on a vacation and like, you didn't even think about the fact that you had eating disorder or not. It was just, I'm going on vacation and I didn't think twice about eating gelato in Italy or, having pizza on a trip or whether or not I was going to eat dessert or whether or not I was going to drink wine with dinner or whether I was going to advocate for lunch when my family wasn't eating lunch. It's just like, it is a part of your life versus this like, okay, I'm going to do this because the eating disorder is really still there. That it could just be that the eating disorder, and to me, that's what a lot of true freedom looks like is what if I got to the point in recovery where this wasn't even on my radar as a possibility, not the like consistent daily, I'm challenging my eating disorder or I'm trying to specifically stay in recovery. But what if I was so free that it wasn't even on my radar that this would be a possibility?
Absolutely. Right. Like I don't even have to think twice about it. And for the record, neither Anna nor I are trying to minimize the complexity of recovery.
Correct.
But we're cultivating hopefulness.
Yeah.
And you've used a lot of parts language, which is interesting. Lauren, who's my co-host on the show, I know that she uses a lot of internal family systems, but parts language is really from that therapeutic modality. For those of you that are listening, I would highly encourage you look this up. But essentially, the premise of this modality is that we all have the ability to be healthy, a healthy self. And what can happen is because we go through hard things, because we go through traumas or painful experiences, or we don't have our attachment needs met or whatever it might be, we develop these parts of ourselves. So, for example, someone might develop anxiety or an eating disorder or whatever. And these parts of us, in air quotations, can get really big and loud. And so we can't talk about healing the eating disorder identity without giving you guys that psychoeducation today of like kind of more specifically what we're referencing here. Mm-hmm. So these parts of us, we can tend to want to like shun them or make them go away. I know various things that I've struggled with in my own life. Like I can almost become just so frustrated with myself that like I'm even struggling in the first place. And I think a lot of clients with eating disorders experience that, or in eating disorder recovery experience that. But the key to healing these unhelpful parts is to actually get curious about the function they serve. So this is what you first mentioned, right? Mm-hmm. That like we don't do these things just for the heck of it. Like most of the things that are what we call maladaptive or unhelpful behaviors that bring clients to our therapy office, they do serve a function. And we have to get really curious about that. And then we also have to get really like compassionate because we can tend to just be like, oh my gosh, just go away. Or like, I don't want anything to do with you.
Yeah.
We have to start to like understand why these parts showed up in the first place and how we can actually like lean more into our healthy self. So, I'm rambling a little bit here, but just echoing what you've already shared.
Well, and I think two things I'll say to that is that, one, I think there's also a sense that hope is so important in eating disorder recovery. And so while I have so many clients that I've been seeing for years that, truly getting to a place of being able to say like, yeah, this eating disorder is not a part of my life anymore is probably the hardest thing they've ever done. I think many people would say that. And also, I get a lot of clients in my office that, especially ones that have had eating disorders for a really long time, that they kind of lose this hope that they really could get better, or that kind of this is as good as it's going to get. Maybe I can like generally refrain from using eating disorder behaviors, or it might periodically pop up in my life, but like, this is kind of good enough. And I tell clients all the time that I'm not about good enough recovery, that I really want people to see like there is kind of this next level of recovery that's not just I'm not using behaviors, but I'm not thinking about this. It's not a part of my everyday life. And I think the other thing too that you spoke to with kind of that parts work is if this is a maladaptive behavior, I also am seeing so many clients, from they're seeing me for a dietitian that I'm continually referring them back to their therapist to say like, hey, like, you may be done with this eating disorder part, but you were showing signs that you continue or popping up things in different ways. That are you doing the work on yourself as a whole person that maybe it won't show up again in the future as an eating disorder, but it's showing up in different parts of your life in a variety of different ways that to me, there's still that kind of therapeutic work that needs to be done that I will say, hey, let's return to your therapist let's make sure that you and your therapist are kind of looking at this total picture and not just saying, okay, we got rid of the eating disorder. Now let's move on with life.
Yeah, because as we know, it doesn't stand alone, right? Like, and even to like, raise my hand here, I'm like, yeah, underneath the eating disorder, there are other things, right? Like historically, I've had to do a lot of work around like recovery from people pleasing or working on my own anxiety or tendency to take too much on and work too much. And so, yeah, those are things that once we heal our relationship with food, we absolutely need to continue to address so that we can be the healthiest version of ourselves.
And I think most people with an eating disorder, they probably have that what we call sticky brain that like it likes to latch on to certain things. And so even if it's not food today or it's not exercise today, it's not uncommon that, we will start identifying, okay, like your food thoughts are going down, but now you're getting real focused on movement or, we're noticing some maybe unhealthy substance use or on fixations on relationships or control in other ways.
Yeah, the sticky brain. Well, I think it might be helpful for today's conversation to outline for our listeners maybe traits or qualities of the eating disorder identity. And I know, I definitely don't want to generalize because I know each eating disorder and each person's recovery is so unique, but that certainly is one, right? Like a sticky brain.
Yep.
I'm curious, Anna, what your thoughts are on other traits that kind of accompany that eating disorder identity. And then let's also talk about the recovery identity.
Yes. So eating disorder identity, I would say, yes, sticky brain. I think about a lot. I think about perfectionism. And sometimes perfectionism isn't always I'm high achieving in my job or I'm high achieving in school. It could be perfectionism about the art forms that they do or perfectionism about relationships or things like that. So I think perfectionism can show up a lot. Depending on the type of eating disorder, sometimes I see a lot of impulse control of kind of some people with eating disorders have a very rigid, mindset that they're very structured, very planning, being spontaneous is very unusual for them. And then I have some that having any structure is very difficult. and kind of they like to go with the whims of their brain. So I see that show up. I see what else? Did I mention anxiety already?
But yeah, well, we talked about
Okay,
anxiety,
yes.
right?
We see that a lot.
As you were talking about the sticky brain.
And
Yeah,
one big thing, I wouldn't say this is a generalization of all people with eating disorders, but I see a tremendous amount of neurodiversity in my office. So ADHD, OCD, autism spectrum disorder, like I do see a lot of overlap. I wouldn't say necessarily all people with those things necessarily have eating disorders, but I do see a lot of overlap in my office.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, words that come to mind as you're talking: rigidity, inflexibility, difficulty with boundaries. So this is kind of another way to say the same thing that you just shared. But yeah, we can be over boundaried where we don't let anyone know about any of our imperfections or areas of vulnerability, right? Or we can be under boundaried where like we have no boundaries at all. And so I think difficulty with boundaries can oftentimes mirror the eating disorder in and of itself, which is interesting to think about.
Yeah.
Difficulty with scheduling changes. So like going on vacation, or I know this time of year, a lot of people are sick, like difficulty even being sick and caring for yourself. A lot of clients that I talk to as well, that are like maybe in the earlier stages of an eating disorder or eating disorder recovery, they like don't have hobbies. Like,
yeah.
Or like if you ask them like what they do for fun, and I say this as someone who like, this is very much part of my story as well. And so there's certainly no shame when I say this, but yeah, it's like, oh, I don't have hobbies. Like I work and I like, that's it, or whatever it is. Right. And so I think the eating disorder can be so time consuming, especially if it's more severe. And so having space and time in your life for like things that are creative or fun or just like not performance oriented.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the amount of, one of my big hobbies is reading. And so the amount of clients that will say, Anna, like, stop trying to get me to join a book club. Like, I'm like, what if you had some, like, what are you going to do instead of, hyper focusing on your food today? How about a book club? And they're like, I'm not a reader. Stop trying to force your hobbies on me. So yes, I have many a times tried to get people to go join a local bookstore's book club.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
I love to read too. What do you like to read? I'm just curious.
I read all over the map. So I read a lot. I mean, I think when people look at what I read, they're always like, you read weird books, because I read so widely. I love like literary fiction. I love memoir. I read a good amount of nonfiction. So it's pretty balanced, but I read pretty widely. So I
That's amazing.
Try to read a wide variety of things. But yes,
yeah,
mix in some work related books there too.
Yeah, for sure. I love to read like, therapeutic books that I'm recommending to clients along with other types of novels.
Well, and even if you don't love to read, to me, it feels like there are so many clients who really find benefit in books and workbooks and things like that. And I never feel like I want to recommend a book to a client, especially a recovery-based resource, if I haven't personally read it and kind of can say both, because there's a book that I love to recommend. It's called Breaking Free from Body Shame, but it's specifically Christian-based. There are Bible verses in the book. So I think is a fabulous resource for someone who identifies with Christianity, but also someone who doesn't. That may not be a great fit for them for a body image resource if that's not their same value system or frame of reference.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, I mean, and of course, we haven't talked about these, but the eating disorder identity, it's like the time and energy and resources that it typically accompanies either hyper focusing on food or body or image or whatever. And that's not across the board for every single eating disorder diagnosis, but a lot of different presentations. Yes. So it begs the question of like, how do we move through that to get to a place of embracing the recovery identity, or letting, hence the topic of this episode, letting go of the eating disorder identity?
I think it's really starting to be curious about, even if it's a teeny tiny 1% of your brain, starting to be curious about like, what are those things that I have any interest in? Sometimes as you start to filter out your social media, if it becomes less focused on food or recipes or things like that, what else is popping up into your feed even would be a good, is it dog memes? And maybe you need to consider, starting a side hustle with being a dog walker, or, going and volunteering at the Humane Society. Maybe it's a lot of travel related things that you could incorporate. Like, I think I want to start traveling or going on trips. It could be a lot of outdoor content and you want to start visiting, a local botanical gardens, or in Nashville, we have Cheekwood, or it could be hiking. Like, I think sometimes starting to see, like, is there any interest in anything? And if you're like, my brain is 100% food related right now and body related, sometimes it might just be you need to start getting curious of, okay, well, like, let me try a bunch of different things. Like, what do other people do for fun? Other people, might join an intramural kickball team. Other people might follow sporting events. Other people might read books or garden or play with pets or spend time with friends. Like, even if you don't know, it might be that practice of, I'm going to try some things and kind of see what I might like over time.
Yeah. And that like expansion, I think is really the opposite of restriction, right? Like, I had a supervisor once, so I can't claim this quote, but she was talking about like recovery being an additive process. And that really stuck with me versus restricting, right? In all shapes and forms, whether it's emotional or nutritional restriction. And so, yeah, just that permission to like get curious, to expand, to have flexibility. And even if you can't like find the answer within, I love what you shared of like, what do other people my age or people that I know, what do my colleagues do for fun? And can I at least challenge myself to A, get curious, and then B, try it. And if I don't like it, then that's also information. And that's one of the pieces of work that I love to do with clients too, is like really figuring out what their dislikes are. And that's also a part of knowing yourself.
Yeah.
Like when I got married, one of the first things I told my husband was like, listen, I'm not going camping. Like, I would like all day long, but like, I'm not a camper.
No.
And I don't like it. One of his best friends like goes camping and they go on this like, multiple night camping trip. And anyway, I've told Sean multiple times, I'm like, I'm not a camper. And like, I feel confident about that. I don't feel shame when I say that. Like, there are things that I just don't like to do. And that was a gift that accompanied recovery, is like having the confidence to know that about myself. And there's no shame if other people like to camp. I'm like, listen, you do you. Like, that's amazing.
Right. My husband is very aware of all of my grandma type hobbies, but also there were things like I knew traveling was really important to me and a partner. So when we were dating, that was something that I made sure that we prioritized. Like, if traveling is really important to me, I need to make sure that this potential partner is someone that I really enjoy traveling with. And so that was something we did a fair amount when we were dating and engaged was, I want to practice traveling with this person that I'm committing my life to in the future.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
And I think too that, when we talk about relationships, there is the danger of someone with an eating disorder sometimes looking at, potential boundaries with, partners or friends or things like that. But at the same time, I think when you recognize health in other people, it can be such a model for you that I think that we talk about that with eating of, with clients, who in your life models for you a healthy relationship with food, who models appropriate eating, who models not perfection eating, but really freedom eating. They eat in a way that seems like what you might picture recovery to be a glimpse of. And I think that can be true in a lot of areas of life, that I think when I have clients that they're not really sure even what their hobbies are, what their interests are, seeing them kind of start to come alongside friends or family members or spouses to say like, well, I don't know if I like, camping, but this friend I have is really into it and I'm going to try it. And maybe they find out they're like Laura and they do not like camping. Or maybe they find out that that's something that they really love and can be really interested in. Or, same thing with food of you might find that, someone is, man, I don't think that I really, I'm not an ice cream person. I don't, your eating disorder tells you that you're not a dessert person. You don't like ice cream. And then turns out you have a significant other or a friend who loves getting ice cream. And so you get a lot of practice with that. And maybe you find out, like if it's my choice, I'm going to pick cookies instead, but I'm happy to go get ice cream with them because I enjoy spending time with this person. Or maybe you find out, actually, I love ice cream too. And that was just a part of my eating disorder that I didn't. And I got to see people model off other people when it's healthy, I think is also a really beautiful part of watching people expand. until not that they have to mimic other people, but kind of as an interim until they get to their own true self, which will be maybe parts of other people in terms of their interests, but also maybe some new things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we can't know unless we try. Right. And
And
so I think that's,
I think the older we get, I think post-COVID broke a lot of people's kind of daily patterns of what they thought they should be doing or that I think in recent years, it's also been really fun to see friends try a ton of new things. I mean, I know people that have, and clients too, that have, people doing stand-up comedy and taking like improv classes, people learning new languages, people getting into volunteer work, people, deciding maybe that they want to have kids in maybe a way that they didn't think they did, or adopting pets, or, just finding these new hobbies that I think even within my own friend group and amongst clients, it's been really fun to see in recent years. Some clients and some friends like try new things and have interests, even if no one else they know is doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Well, this is that experiential part, right? That's like such a sweet, I think opportunity is the word that's coming to mind, that can be seen, as an opportunity for growth and embodiment, right? Like we talk a lot about this in both of our practices of like, what are my dislikes? What are my likes? Can I identify how my body is experiencing this experience of eating ice cream? And maybe I do want cookies, but I enjoy the connection. And so I do think all of what we're talking about is the practice of embodiment, and it's an invitation, right, to get to know ourselves. Lauren talked about this on one of our recent episodes, but just this idea of like coming home to ourselves. And I think that's what really working through an eating disorder, really recovering from an eating disorder means, is like, how are you coming back to yourself versus trying to get rid of something that has been so painful? And just that gentle like perspective shift, I think, can be really helpful for clients.
And that, that idea of coming home to yourself is also a self that's pretty consistently changing and growing. I think both of us, the fact that we've known each other for 7-8 years, like we are both different people. We're different clinicians than we were 10 years ago. And so I think it's not just that kind of idea of coming home to yourself, but also the idea that coming home to a self that will be different in a year or 10 years or the future as well. And that can both be, hard and challenging for clients that struggle with change, but can also be really exciting to think about the fact that we're not stagnant, but that kind of relationship with ourselves is the longest one we will ever have.
Yeah. Yeah. And nurturing it, right? Like having patience with ourselves, gentleness. I mean, I know historically those things have been difficult for me. And so really very evaluating like, that relationship with myself doesn't end once I've reached recovery, right? It's that like open-ended invitation, which I think for those of us that maybe want that like final destination can be hard to even wrestle with, even in of itself.
For sure.
Yeah. An activity this kind of just came to mind, but there's different like activities too, for those of you listening, right, that you can do with your dietitian or with your therapist. I think permission to dream and just have a conversation with your provider can be really helpful. I've done vision boards with clients and we cut out different parts of a magazine and we'll kind of process like, oh, tell me why you chose that color or that picture, and really giving yourself permission to dream about the type of life that you want. And in the therapeutic space, we talk specifically about like surviving, living, and thriving. And I think Anna and I both really, not I think, but I know that we both really want each and every client, whether they have an eating disorder, anxiety, OCD, whatever they have, to reach a place of thriving. And when you're in eating disorder recovery, you're really suffering. And so you really are surviving. And so I love the hopefulness that has been present in this podcast today of like, no, we want you to get to a place of thriving. And part of that is really working through that identity piece.
And I think too that, I love the idea that I've read in multiple different books over the years of just this idea that like how wonderful difference is. And just as every single person's eating disorders can show up so differently, I think everyone's recovery is going to show up really differently. And so I think if you see, a friend or someone on social media or, your therapist or dietitian's examples of recovery, that like recovery is just going to be just as different as everyone's individual eating disorders. And I think I like this idea that as I'm getting older, I think a lot about like, there's a lot of different ways to have a wonderful life. And that there's not just one way that I think sometimes, especially for myself growing up in the South, it's like there was this very like streamlined view of what is a good life in the future. And the older I get, and the more I've just had, friends struggle with different difficult things. I've struggled with my own difficult things. Looking at this idea of like, what does it mean to have a good life? And the reality that that can be so many different things. And so I think for clients as well, like it's beautiful to watch as a provider, like what is their wonderful life is going to be probably really different than my wonderful life and a different client's wonderful life. And I think, there's not this as you dream, like those dreams are going to be really different for different people. And even the dreams I've heard from clients have been really, really different. Yes, I've had, I think, hearing people talk about, I want to, heal my eating disorder and regain my period so I can have a family one day. I think it's a wonderful motivation. But also I have a lot of clients who say, I don't think I want children in the future. I don't think I want to be married in the future. And man, but they want something different, and how all of those different things can make these wonderful different lives, but that there's so many different ways to have a really wonderful life.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, we're done. We need to close on that. Yeah. Maybe that you just like gave our affirmation for today. Like there's so many different ways to have a wonderful life, but gosh, I just really appreciate your time, your thoughtfulness. I know that you are just a wealth of knowledge, and I of course love collaborating on cases with you, but I also just like so appreciate you as a friend and colleague. And this has just been such a sweet recording today. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for having me. Yeah,
of course.
I think that, any clinician, myself, I know Laura would say this as well, is just like, it really is like, working in the mental health space, like people's struggles are real and it's hard. And it's, we have to, as clinicians, really take care of ourselves, but it also is incredibly life-giving to really watch people thrive. And as I tell clients all the time, like, if I didn't watch people every day get better, I would not do this job. And so it really is always a joy when people say like, man, I don't even know what the future holds. I don't know what my dreams are, but I'm going to be willing to kind of set down this eating disorder identity and kind of look at what's next. It really is a joy to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know that I shared with you, we always close with an affirmation and homework. So you are welcome to give one or both of those pieces as we wrap.
Yeah, I mean, I think the affirmation about just a lot of different ways to have a good life, I think is a wonderful one. And I think you could plug in the same word for recovery of just there's a lot of wonderful ways to have a really connected recovery. And I think that as we talked about this idea of kind of dreaming and identity and things like that, I think that I would really encourage anyone listening to dream or think about, what if they were to set down their eating disorder identity, like what is something they might be interested in either picking up that they already know they're really interested in, or what is something that they're interested in trying, even if they don't know. And if you don't feel ready to try something, Nashville's very cold this time of year. You may not want to go outside or garden or things like that, but it might be even just dreaming about some of those things this week.
Yeah. Permission to dream.
Permission to dream.
Yeah. I love it. Well, how can our listeners find you, Anna?
Yeah. So like Laura said, I'm an eating disorder dietitian in Nashville. So I do see new clients and work with clients with eating disorders, disorder eating, any nutrition, any and all nutrition concerns. So I work at Fowler Nutrition, which is a private practice in Nashville. So our website is fowlernutrition.com. You can find my email address or any ways to contact me there. And then I also have an Instagram where I post periodically about just nutrition things that are on my mind and recovery things that are on my mind, which is Anna Greer, GREER.dietitian.
I love it. Yeah, I've loved your content.
Thank you. It's been, as you said with the podcast, it's been a fun new creative outlet in the past couple of months.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's so brave, to put things out in the world, because of course, like we can't put everything we know, think, and feel on one post, but it's vulnerable too. Yeah. And also a creative endeavor. And so I think it's amazing.
Yes, it's a fun to work my brain in a different way.
For sure. Well, thank you all for being here on the Becoming Anchored podcast. We will see you next time. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Laura. Bye.